They say success leaves clues. What they don't tell you is that theft does too. I learned that at 3 in the morning, sitting in a downtown law library with 6 months of stolen code logs spread across mahogany that had seen better cases than mine. The city looked different from the 14th floor at that hour, cleaner somehow, like all the lies got washed away with the traffic. The financial district stretched out below, glass towers reflecting each other in an infinite regression of architecture and ambition. But lies don't wash. They just wait, patient as compound interest, for the moment when someone finally reads the fine print. My name is Jordan Pierce, senior software architect at Meridian Technologies. Was, anyway. Past tense has a way of creeping into your life when you're not paying attention, like water damage behind expensive drywall. You don't see it until the whole wall comes down, and by then you're standing in the wreckage wondering how you missed the signs. I built something beautiful once, an AI-driven logistics platform that could optimize supply chains in real time, learning from chaos, predicting bottlenecks before they formed like a chess master, seeing 20 moves ahead. 18 months of work, nights that bled into mornings, weekends that disappeared into weeks. The kind of obsession that makes you forget to eat, forget to sleep, forget that other people exist in the world beyond your code editor, and the clean logic of algorithms that always tell the truth. It was elegant, efficient, mine, until it wasn't. The day it stopped being mine started like most Thursdays. Coffee that tasted like ambition, a calendar notification for a meeting I didn't want to attend, and Marcus Hendricks walking into the conference room like he owned gravity itself. Like the laws of physics bent around him just slightly, giving him advantages the rest of us had to earn. Marcus was the VP's son. That's how everyone referred to him, even in official emails where his title should have been enough. Not Marcus from product, not Marcus, our new initiative lead. Just the VP's son, like it was a credential that trumped Stanford and McKinsey and whatever other lines were on his resume. Which, at Meridian, it did. Nepotism doesn't announce itself in corporate America. It just shows up at 26 with a corner office and calls it merit. He had that prep school shine you can't fake, expensive haircut that looked effortless but probably cost $300. Watch that cost more than my car payment. Smile that suggested he'd never been told no about anything that mattered. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind that whispered money instead of shouting it. Everything about him said winner. Everything except his eyes, which had the flat quality of someone who'd never had to fight for anything and didn't know how. Jordan, he said, dropping into the chair across from me. We were alone in conference room. See, the small one with frosted glass walls that made shadows look like secrets and turned the office beyond into an impressionist painting of productivity. The table between us was polished maple, reflecting the overhead lights like still water. I've been reviewing your logistics platform. The way he said your made it sound temporary, made it sound like a courtesy he was extending until he decided otherwise. VP Hendricks asked me to take a look at scaling options, he continued, leaning back in that chair like it was a throne. His fingers drummed against the armrest, nervous energy wrapped in confidence, the rhythm slightly off. Impressive work, really impressive, the predictive algorithms especially, but we need to think bigger. I'd heard that before. Bigger in corporate speak usually meant cheaper. I waited, watching his face, learning to read the tells that would matter later, when everything fell apart. I'm thinking we outsource the development, he said, his smile widening like this was good news, like he was doing me a favor. Bring in a team from overseas. I've got contacts in Bangalore, some excellent developers who could take this to the next level, cut costs by 60%, scale faster, free up resources. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something, not looking at me. I've already got preliminary bids. We could have a new team ramped up in 2 months, save the company serious money. The air in the room changed, not temperature exactly, pressure, like we'd suddenly descended in an airplane and my ears needed to pop but couldn't. The platform is already 90% complete, I said, keeping my voice level, professional, pretending my pulse wasn't accelerating. We're in final testing. UAT starts next month. Outsourcing now would mean starting over. Different architecture, different security protocols, different understanding of the problem space. We'd lose months of work and probably end up with an inferior product. But cheaper. He said it like that solved everything, like efficiency was a virtue that trumped quality, experience, knowledge. And honestly, Jordan, we can't justify your salary plus a development team on a single project. This isn't personal, it's just efficiency, business. Everything that starts with "this isn't personal" is about to get very personal. I built this from scratch, I said, and I heard the edge in my voice now, the 18 months bleeding through my professional veneer. The algorithms, the integration layers, the predictive models, the entire data architecture. You can't just hand that to a new team and expect them to understand the decisions I made, the trade-offs, the reason every piece works the way it does. Sure we can. Marcus stood, smoothing his tie, adjusting his cufflinks, small gestures that said this conversation was over, had always been over, had never really been a conversation at all. That's the beauty of good documentation, right? Everything you built, it's all written down, transferable. That's what makes it valuable to the company. He moved toward the door, then paused, looked back with something that might have been pity if it had been sincere. Besides, this is already moving forward. I'm presenting the outsourcing proposal to the board next week. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Professional courtesy. The door clicked shut with the soft sound of an expensive lock engaging, and I sat there in the conference room that suddenly felt like a cell, staring at the frosted glass. Through it, the office beyond looked distorted, shapes moving without clear edges, everyone reduced to shadows and suggestions. Everyone looked the same through that glass. Everyone looked like a ghost. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I hadn't touched it, hadn't moved. The city beyond the windows kept turning, traffic and commerce and the mechanical rhythm of capitalism that doesn't care about your 18 months or your beautiful code or the way you'd started to define yourself by the thing you were building. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe 30, watching the light change as afternoon crept toward evening and thought about documentation, about what makes something valuable to a company, about professional courtesy and what it really means when someone with power uses it. Then I went back to my desk and started reading access logs. That night, I stayed late. Not unusual, I'd been staying late for 18 months, but this time felt different. I wasn't building anymore, I was protecting. Or maybe I was just gathering evidence for a crime that hadn't been officially committed yet, but that I could feel coming like weather, like pressure in my joints before a storm. The Meridian offices after 9 p.m. had a particular quality, fluorescent lights humming over empty desks, the cleaning crew making their rounds with industrial vacuums that sounded like distant thunder. The city spread out beyond floor-to-ceiling windows like a promise no one intended to keep. Most of the lights in the surrounding buildings were dark now, offices surrendered to night, but here and there a window glowed with the lonely dedication of someone else staying late, someone else who'd confused their work with their worth. I liked the silence. It felt honest in a way the daytime office never did. I pulled up the project repository, checking access logs with the same attention to detail I'd used building the platform itself. Standard security review, I told myself. Due diligence. But my hands were shaking slightly as I typed the commands, and due diligence doesn't usually make your pulse race or your mouth go dry. The logs told a story. They always do, if you know how to read them. Marcus had been in the codebase, not just reviewing, which would have been his right as a director, copying, downloading entire modules, documentation, architectural diagrams, proprietary algorithms I'd spent months perfecting. All of it time-stamped over the past 2 weeks, always after hours, always from his personal account, instead of going through proper channels, always in the dark when he thought no one was watching. I cross-referenced the dates with my email archives. 2 weeks ago, the same day as his first access, Marcus had sent his first message to an offshore development firm. I knew because I'd set up monitoring on any external communications mentioning the project name. Paranoia, maybe. Or maybe just the instinct of someone who'd worked in corporate tech long enough to know that your work is only yours until someone with more authority decides it isn't. He wasn't just proposing to outsource my work. He was preparing to replace me with it, building his presentation, his business case, his reputation on code he'd stolen, while pretending to be helpful, while offering me professional courtesy, while smiling that prep school smile that had never learned the difference between charm and honesty. I made copies of everything. Triple backups, encrypted archives stored in 3 separate locations. Cloud, external drive, a thumb drive I wore on my keychain like a talisman against erasure. Insurance, I told myself. Just insurance. But insurance against what, exactly? Against being written out of my own story. Against watching 18 months of my life get reassigned to strangers who'd never seen the problem I solved. Never felt the satisfaction of an algorithm finally clicking into place at 4 a.m. when you're running on coffee and obsession. Against irrelevance, maybe. That was the real theft. Not the code itself, but the meaning behind it. The proof that I'd made something that mattered. I sat at my desk until 2 in the morning, organizing files, documenting everything with the same precision I'd used building the platform, creating a paper trail that would survive whatever came next. The city beyond my window had gone quiet. even the traffic reduced to occasional headlights sweeping through empty streets. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a lawyer, anyone who could tell me this was crazy or paranoid, or that I was overreacting to office politics that would blow over by Monday. But I didn't call anyone, because deep in my gut, in that place where instinct lives before it becomes thought, I knew this wasn't going to blow over. I knew Thursday's board meeting was coming like an execution date, and that when Marcus stood up to present his cost-saving initiative, my name would be nowhere in the PowerPoint. My 18 months would be reduced to existing infrastructure and the legacy code, and opportunities for optimization. I drove home through empty streets, traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one. Red, yellow, green, all that order for a city that was sleeping. All those rules that only mattered because we agreed to follow them. I wondered what happened when someone stopped agreeing, when someone looked at red and decided it meant go anyway, and had enough power that no one could stop them. My apartment was dark when I got home. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat by the window with a glass of whiskey I didn't remember pouring, watching the skyline, watching the occasional window still lit in buildings full of people who'd found a way to balance ambition with something like peace. The whiskey tasted like smoke and regret. Somewhere in this city, Marcus was probably sleeping soundly. People like Marcus always sleep soundly. They don't lie awake wondering if they're paranoid or if the ground really is shifting beneath them. They just take what they want and call it business and move on to the next thing without looking back. I finished the whiskey, poured another. Thought about efficiency and courtesy and the way theft sounds like strategy when it's spoken in conference rooms with frosted glass. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday, 7 days. 7 days to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. The kind who documented their own erasure quietly, professionally, with courtesy. Or the kind who fought back even when the odds were impossible and the ending was already written. I chose fight. Looking back now, I'm not sure I chose anything at all. Some decisions make themselves and you just watch your hands move, executing commands you didn't consciously write. The thing about evidence is that it doesn't care about your feelings. It just sits there, cold and factual, waiting for someone to interpret it. Give it meaning, turn data into narrative, ones and zeros into story, timestamps into proof of malice. I spent the weekend building that narrative. Saturday morning, I woke up with purpose for the first time since Thursday's meeting. My apartment became a war room, laptop on the coffee table, printed emails spread across the hardwood floor in chronological order. Whiteboards I'd borrowed from the office, technically stolen, but I was past caring about technically, covering 2 walls with flowcharts and timelines. Red marker for Marcus's actions, blue for company policy violations, green for timestamps that proved intent. It looked like the workspace of someone obsessed, or maybe just someone who understood that the truth required architecture, same as code. The story was simple once you laid it out. Marcus Hendricks had accessed proprietary code without authorization, downloaded it to personal devices in violation of security protocols, shared it with external vendors before any official approval process began, and was now planning to present my work as his own cost-saving initiative while writing me out of the narrative entirely. Simple, provable, and completely career-ending for him if it went public. The question was, what to do with it. Option 1, HR. That was the proper channel, the corporate-approved method of raising concerns, the thing that would prove I'd followed procedure. But HR protected the company, not employees. Everyone knew that. HR was where complaints went to die quietly, buried under NDAs and carefully worded exit packages. And when the concern involved the VP's son, when it implicated nepotism and theft and the kind of corruption that made executive floors uncomfortable, I knew which way the protection would flow. Option 2, confront Marcus directly. Lay out the evidence, demand he back off, give him a chance to do the right thing. But that assumed he'd care about being caught. That assumed shame still worked on someone who'd been insulated from consequences his entire life. Men like Marcus don't become directors at 26 by respecting boundaries. They become directors by ignoring boundaries until everyone else forgets they existed in the first place. Option 3, wait. Let him present to the board. Let him claim credit for identifying the outsourcing opportunity, for being innovative and cost-conscious and exactly the kind of forward-thinking leader Meridian needed. Then produce the evidence showing he'd been planning it for weeks, using stolen code to build his case, violating policy and probably several laws in the process. That option felt like revenge, which meant it was probably the wrong one. Revenge is what you choose when you've run out of better options, when you're tired of being the reasonable person in an unreasonable situation. I was very tired. I called my lawyer on Monday morning. Daniel Reeves, an intellectual property specialist I'd met at a tech conference 2 years ago, back when I still went to conferences and believed in networking, and the myth that good work got recognized. We'd kept in touch the way professionals do, occasional emails about interesting cases, LinkedIn endorsements that meant nothing, the standing promise to grab coffee that never quite materialized because we were both too busy building careers that could collapse without warning. "Jordan," he said when he picked up, and I could hear traffic in the background, the soundtrack of someone already in motion. "This better not be about another non-compete clause. I can't take another startup trying to prevent developers from working anywhere in their industry for 5 years. "Worse," I said, "I need to talk about copyright infringement and corporate theft." Silence on the line. The traffic noise faded like he'd stepped into a building. Then, "Are you the thief or the victim?" "Victim? You sure?" "Very." Another pause. Longer. "You free for lunch?" We met at a bistro downtown, the kind of place where lawyers and executives pretended privacy still existed, where conversations were conducted in low voices and everyone assumed the table next to them was listening. Dark wood, leather booths, lighting that made everyone look slightly conspiratorial. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a scotch at noon and a leather portfolio that probably cost what I made in a month. He stood when I approached, handshake, firm, eyes assessing. Daniel was 40, looked 35, had the kind of focused energy that came from winning more cases than he lost. His suit was expensive but not ostentatious, dark gray with a blue tie that suggested creativity within boundaries. Trial lawyer aesthetic. "You look like hell," he said, sitting back down. "I haven't slept in 4 days. Good sign or bad sign? Obsessive sign." He gestured to the waiter, ordered me a scotch without asking. "Tell me everything." I did. Took out my laptop, showed him the access logs, the emails, the timeline of Marcus's planning, watched his expression shift from curious to concerned to something colder, professional interest, the look of someone calculating odds, angles, potential fees. "You documented all this yourself?" he asked. "I'm a software architect. Documentation is what I do. Most people don't think to protect themselves before they need protection. Most people trust their employers right up until the termination notice." "Most people trust their employers," I agreed. "I work in tech. We know better." He smiled at that, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The access logs are solid, time-stamped, difficult to forge. The external communications are damning. He's clearly shopping your work around before getting approval. But here's the problem, and you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "Legally, anything you created while employed by Meridian belongs to Meridian. That's standard in your employment contract, I guarantee it. They can do whatever they want with your code, including outsource it, give it away, or set it on fire in the parking lot. They can fire you and replace you with cheaper labor. They can erase your name from every commit log and credit it to Marcus. All of that is perfectly legal." I'd known that. On some level, I'd always known that. But hearing it said out loud made the scotch taste bitter, made the room feel smaller. "However," Daniel continued, and I latched onto that word like a lifeline, "Marcus accessed your work without authorization from IT or project management. That's not his code to access personally, even if it belongs to the company. He shared proprietary code with external vendors before any formal approval process. That's not just policy violation. That's potential criminal misappropriation depending on what he shared and whether those vendors signed NDAs. So, what are my options?" Daniel took a long drink, set down his glass carefully. "Honestly, walking away is safest. These fights are expensive, time-consuming, emotionally devastating. Even when you win, you lose. Your reputation suffers. No one wants to hire the architect who sued their last employer, no matter how justified. You become that guy. Difficult, litigious, someone who couldn't just take the L and move on like a professional. And if I don't walk away?" He studied me over his glass, reading something in my face I wasn't sure I wanted him to see. "Then you need to decide what outcome you actually want. Because revenge, justice, and getting your job back are 3 completely different battles, and you can't fight all of them at once. You have to choose." I thought about that. About 18 months of work, about code that felt like poetry, like proof that I could make something beautiful in a world increasingly designed for efficiency over elegance. About Marcus's smile and the way he'd said professional courtesy, like it meant something, like words still had meaning when everyone knew they didn't. "I want the truth on record," I said finally. "I want what I built to be attributed correctly, even if it gets outsourced and destroyed. I want Marcus to understand that theft has consequences. even for people whose fathers are VPs, and I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror without wondering if I should have fought back. That's a tall order. Can you help me? Daniel signaled for another round. The waiter appeared silently, replaced our glasses, disappeared. Outside the window, the city moved past, suits and briefcases and the endless churn of commerce. Everyone looked purposeful. Everyone looked like they knew where they were going. First, Daniel said, we send a cease and desist to Marcus and Meridian's legal department, lay out the policy violations, demand the board presentation be canceled pending investigation. That probably won't work. VP Hendricks will protect his son, that's what fathers do. But it establishes your awareness and opposition, creates a paper trail. And when it doesn't work, then we file a complaint with the state labor board for wrongful termination. Because they will fire you, Jordan. The second you send that letter, your employment is over. But we can argue constructive dismissal, retaliation, violation of whistleblower protections. We can also consider civil litigation for misappropriation, and potentially go after Marcus personally if we can prove he acted with intent to defraud the company. So, I lose my job either way. You already lost your job, Daniel said quietly. You just haven't admitted it yet. Thursday's board meeting? That's not about whether to outsource your project. That's about Marcus proving he's VP material. Your code is just the vehicle. You were always going to be collateral damage. The scotch was gone. I didn't remember drinking it. The restaurant was filling with the lunch crowd. Suits and expense accounts, everyone performing success, everyone pretending the game wasn't rigged. I wondered how many of them had already lost something they loved and were just waiting for the paperwork to make it official. Do it, I said. Send the letter. You're sure? Because once we start this, there's no walking it back. Meridian will come at you hard. They'll question your performance, your mental state, your professional conduct. They'll make you look paranoid and vindictive. They'll turn this into a story about a disgruntled employee who couldn't accept business decisions. I have evidence. Evidence doesn't matter if the judge doesn't like you, or if Meridian's lawyers are better at telling stories than we are, or if you run out of money before the case concludes. I have evidence, I repeated, and I have you. That's enough. Daniel looked at me for a long moment, and I wondered what he saw. Someone brave or someone foolish, someone principled or someone self-destructive. Maybe all of it at once. Maybe that's what integrity looked like in a world designed to punish it. Okay, he said finally. I'll draft the letter tonight. Should go out tomorrow. And Jordan? Yeah? Document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every email, every look someone gives you in the hallway. Because from now on, you're not an employee. You're a witness to your own story, and you better make damn sure you get it right. The letter went out Tuesday afternoon at 3:47 p.m. I know because I watched Daniel send it, sitting in his office with coffee gone cold, watching the cursor move across his screen as he attached the evidence files, access logs, policy documents, timeline analysis. Watching him hit send and lean back with the satisfied expression of someone who just lobbed a grenade into a boardroom and was waiting to see what exploded. Now we wait, he said. I didn't have to wait long. Wednesday morning, I was summoned to a meeting with VP Hendricks himself. The email came at 8:06 a.m. from his executive assistant, professional, courteous, utterly devoid of warmth. VP Hendricks requests your presence in his office at 10 a.m. to discuss an urgent matter regarding your recent communication. Like I'd sent a wedding invitation instead of documented evidence of his son's theft. I dressed carefully that morning. Suit. I usually saved for presentations, good shoes, tie that said I was taking this seriously. Professional armor. I knew it wouldn't help. This meeting had one outcome, and we both knew it. But it felt important to show up looking like someone who still believed in rules, in procedures, in the fiction that merit mattered more than bloodlines. The executive floor was different from where I usually worked. Quieter, better furniture. Art that was probably worth more than my annual salary, hanging casually on walls like wealth, was just another form of decoration. The receptionist smiled at me with the kind of sympathy that meant she knew exactly why I was there, and had probably already processed the termination paperwork. VP Hendricks' office was a corner suite with views of the river, the kind of vista that made you understand why people fought for power, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that cost more than my car, abstract art that probably had meaning I was too unsophisticated to understand. Bold colors, aggressive angles, the kind of thing that said money without saying taste. Everything about the space communicated authority, permanence, the weight of institutional power that had been accumulating interest since before I was born. Hendricks was 55, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses in December and vacation homes with year-round sun. He wore a navy suit that probably cost $5,000, and he didn't stand when I entered. Didn't offer his hand. Just gestured to a chair across from his desk like I was a subordinate being called in for discipline, which, of course, I was. "Jordan," he said, my first name, no title, establishing dominance through casualness. "I received a very concerning letter from your attorney yesterday." "I'm sure you did. These are serious allegations you're making against my son. I hope you understand the implications." The way he said "my son" confirmed everything I needed to know about how this conversation would go. Not Marcus, not Director Hendricks. My son, like that was a defense against theft, like bloodline trumped evidence. "I have evidence," I said, keeping my voice level. "Access logs, emails, download records. Marcus has been copying proprietary code and sharing it with external vendors without authorization. He's planning to present my work as his own cost-saving initiative without attribution. Marcus is exploring cost-saving measures," Hendricks said, and his voice had that quality of someone explaining reality to a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "That's his job as a director. Reviewing code and consulting with vendors is part of standard due diligence. Not without IT authorization. Not by downloading entire repositories to personal accounts. Not by sharing proprietary algorithms with companies that haven't signed NDAs. I've reviewed Marcus's actions with our legal team." He leaned forward slightly, hands folded on his desk, expensive watch catching the light. "Everything he did falls within his role and responsibilities. Your letter, however, constitutes defamation and interference with business operations. You've damaged my son's reputation and this company's strategic planning with baseless accusations." The air left the room, or maybe it was still there, and my lungs just forgot how to use it. "I'm documenting policy violations," I said. "With evidence, timestamps, proof of unauthorized access. You're making accusations that could harm this company's interests and my son's career. That's unacceptable." Hendricks opened a folder on his desk, pulled out papers I recognized, my performance reviews from the past 2 years. "I'm prepared to be generous, Jordan. You've done good work here, adequate work. I don't want this to get ugly. Withdraw your complaint, apologize to Marcus for these allegations, and we'll forget this happened. You can even stay on through the transition if you handle this professionally." Professional? That word again. The universal corporate absolution. The word that meant surrender your dignity quietly. "And if I don't, then you'll be terminated for cause, insubordination, failure to collaborate with leadership, creating a hostile work environment through unfounded accusations." He slid a paper across the desk. "Termination agreement, already drafted, my name in the signature line. You'll lose your severance package, will contest any unemployment claim, and will pursue legal action for defamation and interference with business operations." He paused, let that sink in. "You're a smart man, Jordan. Smart enough to know when you're outmatched." I looked at the paper, at my name in the signature line, like my consent had already been assumed, at the generous severance package I'd be forfeiting, the money I'd need to survive while looking for new work in an industry that would hear I'd sued my last employer and quietly pass on my resume. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "You have until Friday, 5 p.m. After that, the offer is withdrawn and we proceed with termination for cause." I stood. My legs felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. "Can I ask you something?" "What?" "Do you actually believe Marcus acted appropriately? Or do you just not care because he's your son?" Hendricks' expression didn't change. "I believe my son is an asset to this company, and that your accusations are motivated by resentment about necessary business decisions. I believe you're talented but difficult, and that this organization will continue succeeding long after you're gone." He picked up his phone, dismissing me. "Friday at 5. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I left without responding. Took the elevator down 30 floors, watching the numbers descend like a countdown to something I couldn't stop. Walked out into autumn sunlight that felt artificial, staged, like someone had turned up the brightness to make everything look cheerful, while underneath everything was breaking apart. The city kept moving around me. Cars, people, the mechanical rhythm of commerce that doesn't care about your 18 months or your beautiful code or the evidence in your email that proves you were right. Everyone had somewhere to be, something to do, roles to play in a system that kept running, whether you understood it or not, whether it was fair or not, whether you got erased or not. I called Daniel from my car, hands shaking on the wheel. "They're threatening to fire me for cause and sue me for defamation," I said. "Expected, standard intimidation tactics. They're hoping you'll fold." "Will I lose if it goes to court?" static on the line. Daniel thinking, calculating odds I couldn't see. In litigation, hard to say. The evidence is strong, but juries are unpredictable, and Meridian has unlimited legal resources. They can drag this out for years, bleed you dry through discovery and depositions and procedural motions, make you choose between fighting and eating. He paused. But that's not the right question. What is? Can you afford to fight? Not just financially, emotionally, professionally, personally. Because this will take years of your life and destroy your reputation in the industry. Even if you win, you lose. Every future employer will Google your name and find articles about the lawsuit. Every interview will have that moment when they ask about your last job, and you have to explain why you're suing them. You become that person who couldn't just accept that business is business and move on. I watch pedestrians cross the street, all of them heading somewhere with purpose, certainty. I envied that. Envied the clarity of having somewhere to go, something to do that wasn't choosing between surrender and self-destruction. What would you do? I asked. Daniel was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, honestly, I'd burn it all down. But I'm already a lawyer, Jordan. I don't have a reputation left to destroy. You do. You have to decide if you're willing to sacrifice it for the principle of being right. I thought about that. About 18 months. About code that felt like poetry. About Marcus's smile and Hendrix's tan and the way they both looked at me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person who'd built something beautiful and deserved to keep it. Do it, I said. File everything. Labor complaint, civil suit, whatever you think will stick. I'm not apologizing for documenting the truth. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. The line went quiet again. Then, okay, I'll file with the State Labor Board tomorrow. Civil litigation will take longer to prepare, but we should have something ready in 2 weeks. And Jordan? Yeah? Don't go back to the office. As of now, you're a liability they'll want to eliminate. Anything you touch becomes evidence of tampering. Any email you send becomes proof of a hostile work environment. Keep copies of everything you already have, but don't create anything new. Don't document, don't communicate, don't give them ammunition. Understood. And one more thing, you're about to become very unpopular. Former colleagues will avoid you. Recruiters will see your name and move on. Friends at Meridian will stop returning calls because associating with you is career suicide. Make peace with that now, or it'll eat you alive later. I hung up and sat in my car, engine running, heat blasting even though it was 70 degrees outside. The Meridian building stretched into the sky behind me, glass and steel, and the illusion of permanence. I'd walked into that building every day for 4 years, believed in it, bled for it, built something beautiful inside it that would now be taken apart and outsourced to people who'd never understand the elegance of what I'd made. Now it was just architecture, beautiful, impersonal, indifferent to the small dramas of people like me. I drove home and started packing up my life. The lawsuit moved with the speed of bureaucracy, which is to say it barely moved at all. Daniel filed a complaint with the State Labor Board on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I received termination papers, delivered to my apartment by courier wearing a vest that said Meridian Technologies. Because even firing me required branding, required making sure I understood this was official, documented, real. The letter cited gross insubordination, failure to collaborate with leadership, making false accusations against senior management, and creating a hostile work environment through unsubstantiated claims and refusal to engage constructively with legitimate business decisions. 300 words of corporate euphemism that all meant the same thing. I'd told the truth and needed to be eliminated. No severance, no references. 4 years of employment erased with a paragraph and a signature I didn't recognize from someone in HR I'd never met. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt relieved. The pretending was over. No more corporate courtesy, no more strategic silence, no more acting like this was normal or acceptable or just how business worked. Just the clean binary of truth and lies, with a judge eventually deciding which was which and whether that distinction still mattered. The Labor Board scheduled a hearing for 6 months out. 6 months of unemployment, of watching my savings drain into rent and groceries, and the mounting legal fees that Daniel assured me we'd recoup if we won. 6 months of updating my resume and removing Meridian from it entirely, because including them meant explaining why I'd been terminated, which meant admitting I'd sued them, which meant never getting another interview. Daniel explained that civil litigation would take longer, maybe 2 years before we saw a courtroom, if Meridian's lawyers did what he expected and filed every procedural motion they could think of. 2 years of depositions and discovery and interrogatories. 2 years of my life on hold, while lawyers argued about jurisdiction and standing, and whether Marcus had acted with intent or just aggressive ambition that crossed the line into theft. "We can still settle," he said over the phone a week after the termination. "Meridian might offer something to make this go away quietly. Save everyone the headache of discovery." "What kind of something?" "Money, not as much as you deserve, but enough to move on. An NDA that prevents you from discussing the case. Maybe a reference letter saying you left on mutually agreed terms. The standard package for making uncomfortable truths disappear. And Marcus, protected, always. That's how these settlements work. The company pays to bury the story, and the people who created the story get to keep their jobs and their reputations. Justice isn't part of the equation." I looked out my apartment window at the city, lights starting to glow as evening settled in like a slow bruise. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Marcus was probably celebrating. Drinks with colleagues, congratulations on his cost-saving initiative, maybe already planning his next move up the corporate ladder. The outsourcing was probably approved by now, my platform being handed off to developers in Bangalore, who'd been given my documentation and told to make it work without being told why it worked, how every piece connected to every other piece in ways that weren't in the documentation. Because some things you only understand by building them yourself. The thought didn't make me angry anymore, just tired, bone tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. "No settlement," I said. "I want the hearing. It's your funeral. Then let's make it a good one. 6 months is a strange amount of time, long enough to rebuild your life. Short enough that you spend every day thinking about the old one. Long enough to establish new routines. Short enough that those routines feel temporary, like you're just killing time until the real thing starts again." I freelanced, taking contract work that didn't ask too many questions about employment gaps or why I'd left my last job. The tech community is small enough that word travels fast. Jordan Pierce sued Meridian, stay away from him, but large enough that some people don't care about drama if you're good at what you do. I was good. That still mattered, at least to some. The work was different from what I'd been doing. Smaller projects, tighter deadlines. None of the deep architectural challenges that had made my logistics platform feel like art. But it paid rent and kept my skills sharp and gave me something to do besides obsess over the hearing that was slowly, incrementally approaching. Nights were harder. I'd built a routine around Meridian. Coffee at 7, code by 8. Lunch at my desk, reviewing pull requests. Afternoon meetings that felt important. Debugging until dark. Drive home with podcasts about tech trends and startup culture. Without it, time felt formless. I tried to establish new patterns, but they felt arbitrary, meaningless, like I was playing house with my own life. I went to the gym, started running, read books I'd been meaning to read for years, but never had time for. Made elaborate dinners for one and ate them standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the table alone felt too sad. The apartment was cleaner than it had ever been. Turns out you have a lot of time for cleaning when you don't have a job or a purpose or 18 months of work that defined you. Daniel sent updates periodically. Discovery was brutal, exactly as he'd predicted. Meridian's lawyers requesting everything from my college transcripts to medical records to social media posts from the past 5 years. They were building a profile. Difficult employee, poor team player, someone prone to paranoia and baseless accusations, and an inflated sense of their own importance. Someone who couldn't accept that business requires hard decisions, and that sometimes talented people get outsourced because efficiency matters more than ego. They deposed my former colleagues. I read the transcripts late at night, bourbon replacing the whiskey I'd been drinking, because at some point you need to switch up your self-medication. Most people said I was talented but isolated, focused but uncollaborative, skilled but resistant to feedback. The corporate euphemisms for someone who didn't socialize enough, who worked too hard, who cared more about the code than the politics. A few people defended me, said I was brilliant, dedicated, that the logistics platform was my vision, and that outsourcing it was a mistake. Those people were no longer at Meridian. Funny how that worked. Marcus gave a deposition. I read the transcript with a red pen, marking lies like I was grading homework, like someone would care about my annotations. There were a lot of lies. He claimed he'd had authorization for all code access, claimed he'd checked with IT and they'd given verbal approval that simply wasn't documented, claimed the external communications were preliminary research, nothing more, standard industry practice when evaluating strategic options, claimed I'd been warned repeatedly about my attitude and refusal to collaborate, that HR had documentation of complaints about my behavior. All of it was provable false, but proving it required patience, Required believing the system would eventually get around to caring about truth versus lies. Required faith in a hearing officer I'd never met in a municipal building I'd never seen. Faith that someone would look at the timestamps and access logs and understand that the story Marcus told didn't match the story the data told. The board had approved his outsourcing proposal, of course. 2 days after I was fired, the announcement went out. Meridian Technologies was partnering with an offshore development firm to scale our logistics platform efficiently and bring fresh perspectives to an important strategic initiative. My name appeared nowhere in the announcement. 18 months reduced to our platform, like it had been built by committee, like it belonged to everyone, which meant it belonged to no one. I heard through the network, former colleagues who still talked to me when no one from Meridian was watching, that it was failing. Bugs, missed deadlines, architecture problems that the new team couldn't solve because they didn't understand the problem I'd been solving. Didn't know why I'd made certain choices that seemed inefficient until you understood the constraints. They were learning what I'd known from the start. Elegant solutions can't be replicated by throwing cheaper labor at them and hoping documentation is enough. That should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt like waste. Like watching someone take apart a watch to see how it worked and being surprised when the pieces didn't reassemble themselves. The hearing finally arrived on a Tuesday in October. The labor board office was in a municipal building. Downtown, fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. Linoleum floors that had seen decades of traffic. The smell of old coffee and older bureaucracy. Not the venue for moral reckonings. But then, maybe that was appropriate. Justice doesn't need marble columns and oak paneling. It just needs attention to detail, and someone willing to read the fine print. The hearing officer was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Morrison. She'd been mediating labor disputes for 30 years, Daniel told me. Fair, impartial, by the book. Immune to corporate charm and executive intimidation. Someone who'd seen every variety of bullshit employers could generate and had stopped being impressed decades ago. We sat at a long conference table. Me, Daniel, Marcus, VP Hendricks, and 2 lawyers from Meridian's firm who probably charged more per hour than I used to make in a day. The room was generic. Beige walls, bad art. A window that looked out on another building's brick wall. This was where my 18 months would be judged, in a room that could have been anywhere, that looked like every bureaucratic space designed to drain drama from human conflict and replace it with procedure. Patricia reviewed the case file, pages rustling in the quiet room. Outside, the city hummed with traffic and ambition. Inside, we waited in silence broken only by paper and breathing and the hum of fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. "Mr. Pierce," Patricia said finally, looking up with eyes that had seen versions of this story 1,000 times. "You're alleging wrongful termination and corporate policy violations. Specifically, you claim Mr. Hendricks." She nodded at Marcus, who sat very straight in his suit like posture could substitute for innocence. "Accessed proprietary code without authorization and shared it with external parties. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Meridian's position is that Mr. Hendricks acted within his directorial authority, and that you were terminated for legitimate performance and conduct issues." Jameson, the lead lawyer, expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive education that taught him how to make theft sound like business, nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor. Mr. Pierce has a documented history of refusing to collaborate, missing deadlines, and responding to feedback with hostility. The termination was justified and unrelated to any baseless accusations he later fabricated as retaliation." Daniel leaned forward, and I could see him shift into lawyer mode, that precise formality that meant he was about to dismantle someone's argument piece by piece. "We have extensive documentation showing Marcus Hendricks accessed code repositories outside normal protocols, downloaded proprietary materials to personal accounts in violation of security policy, and contacted external vendors before any official approval process began. We also have evidence that Mr. Pierce's performance reviews were uniformly excellent until he raised concerns about Mr. Hendricks's behavior." "I'd like to see that documentation," Patricia said, and there was something in her voice. Not quite interest, not quite skepticism. Professional attention. The tone of someone who would read every page and remember every detail, and then make a decision based on what the evidence actually showed, rather than who told the better story. We spent 3 hours going through it. Access logs with timestamps that showed Marcus in the codebase at 2 a.m., downloading modules he had no legitimate reason to access. Emails to offshore development firms dated weeks before the board meeting, discussing my platform's architecture in detail that could only have come from stolen documentation. Download records showing proprietary algorithms being copied to Marcus's personal cloud storage. Timeline analysis showing that every step of his cost-saving initiative was built on code he'd accessed without authorization. Marcus's lawyers tried to dismiss it, claimed I'd misinterpreted routine business practices, that directors had broad authority to review any project, that my termination was coincidental timing. But the logs didn't care about interpretation. They just showed what happened, when it happened, who did it. Binary truth in a world that preferred narrative ambiguity. Patricia took notes, asked questions that showed she understood both tech and corporate policy, that she knew the difference between legitimate review and unauthorized access, cross-referenced dates with policy documents, highlighted inconsistencies in Meridian's explanations for why Marcus needed personal copies of code he could access through proper channels if his motives were legitimate. We broke for lunch. I ate a sandwich from a vending machine, tasting nothing. Daniel made phone calls, managing other cases, other people's disasters. Marcus and his father and their lawyers went somewhere expensive, probably somewhere with real food and wine and the assumption that money could still make this go away. When we reconvened, Patricia addressed Marcus directly. Mr. Hendricks, did you have explicit IT authorization to download these code repositories to your personal accounts? Marcus shifted in his chair, glanced at his lawyers. I had authorization as a director to review project materials for strategic evaluation. That's not what I asked. Did you have IT authorization for personal downloads? I don't recall the specific approval process, but I was acting within my role as a director, evaluating projects for efficiency and, yes or no, please. Silence. The kind that fills courtrooms and hearing rooms and anywhere truth is being weighed against convenience. The kind that means someone is deciding whether to lie under oath or admit they did something wrong. No, Marcus said finally, voice quiet. Not explicit IT authorization. And these emails to external vendors, were they sent before or after board approval for outsourcing? Before, but they were preliminary inquiries, standard due diligence. Before or after board approval? Before. Patricia made a note, looked at the Meridian lawyers with an expression I couldn't read. Gentlemen, your company policy requires IT authorization for accessing proprietary code outside standard development environments, correct? Jameson nodded reluctantly. Yes, but there's some flexibility for senior leadership conducting strategic reviews. Yes or no, counselor? Does policy require IT authorization? Yes. And policy requires board approval before engaging external vendors for projects involving proprietary technology? In general, yes, but preliminary discussions don't necessarily constitute engagement. Yes or no? Yes. Another note. Patricia closed the file with the careful precision of someone who'd reached a conclusion and was now just confirming details. I'll issue my findings within 30 days. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you for your time. We filed out into afternoon sunlight that felt harsh after the fluorescent dimness. Marcus didn't look at me. VP Hendricks kept his arm around his son's shoulders, protective and proprietary, the gesture of a father who would shield his child from consequences, no matter what those consequences proved. The lawyers talked in low voices, already planning appeals and procedural motions and the 1,000 ways to delay acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Daniel and I walked to his car in silence, October air sharp with the promise of winter. How do you think it went? I asked. She believes you. Whether that matters legally is a different question. She has to decide if the policy violations were serious enough to constitute wrongful termination, or if Meridian can argue your firing was for legitimate reasons that just happened to coincide with your complaints. But you think we have a shot? I think Patricia Morrison doesn't like watching people abuse their authority, and I think she really doesn't like being lied to in her hearing room when she has timestamps that prove otherwise. He unlocked the car. But don't get your hopes up. Even if we win, Meridian has a dozen ways to appeal and delay. This could drag on for years. How long do I need to wait for her decision? 30 days. Maybe less if she's feeling decisive. Maybe more if the case is complex enough that she wants to review everything twice. 23 days, actually. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Certified mail, official seal, the weight of bureaucracy behind every word. The power of the state condensed into 3 pages of formal findings and legal conclusions. Patricia Morrison had ruled in my favor. She found that Marcus Hendricks had violated multiple corporate security policies by accessing proprietary code without authorization. She found that he had downloaded confidential materials to personal devices in violation of data protection protocols. She found that he had engaged external vendors before any official approval process. sharing trade secrets with entities that had not signed non-disclosure agreements. She found that my complaints about these violations were protected under state whistleblower statutes. She found that my termination occurred in direct retaliation for raising legitimate concerns about policy violations and potential misappropriation of intellectual property. She ordered Meridian Technologies to pay back wages for the period of unemployment. She ordered them to restore benefits retroactively. She ordered them to pay damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. She ordered them to expunge my termination from company records and provide accurate references confirming my employment and performance. More than that, she recommended the state attorney general investigate potential criminal misappropriation of trade secrets under relevant statutes governing corporate espionage and theft of proprietary information. I read the letter 3 times, standing in my apartment with October afternoon light slanting through windows, city noise filtering up from the street like the soundtrack to other people's lives. The words didn't change. The findings didn't shift. Truth remained truth no matter how many times I checked. I'd won. Not everything. Justice doesn't work that way. Doesn't restore what's lost or undo what's done. The ruling wouldn't give me back 18 months of work, or erase the outsourcing, or rebuild my platform with the elegance it deserved. It wouldn't change the fact that my code was now being maintained by people who didn't understand it, that my architecture was being modified by developers who'd never lived inside the problem I solved. It wouldn't restore my reputation in an industry that had already decided I was difficult for having the audacity to document theft. But it put truth on record, made it official, documented, real, proved that I wasn't paranoid or vindictive or a disgruntled employee who couldn't accept business decisions. Proved that Marcus had stolen, that Hendricks had protected him, that Meridian had fired me for refusing to be complicit in the erasure of my own work. Daniel called an hour later, sounding more energized than I'd ever heard him, like he'd just won the lottery instead of a labor board ruling. "Did you see?" "Yeah. Jordan, this is about as close to complete victory as you get in labor disputes. The Attorney General recommendation is huge. That's not standard. Patricia went out of her way to flag this for criminal review. That means she's not just saying Marcus violated policy. She's saying he potentially committed crimes. What happens now? Meridian will appeal, but they're on weak ground. More likely, they'll offer a serious settlement to make this go away before the AG starts investigating. We're talking significant money on top of the ordered damages, full legal fees, references that make you sound like employee of the decade, everything. And Marcus? If the AG investigates, he's looking at potential criminal charges, trade secret theft, corporate espionage, fraud. Depends on what they find in discovery. Either way, his career at Meridian is over. You can't survive a ruling like this, not even with your father as VP. The board will want distance from anything that smells like criminal liability. I sat down, suddenly tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I didn't want to destroy him. You didn't. He destroyed himself. You just documented it. That's the thing people never understand about these cases. The evidence doesn't lie, doesn't have an agenda. It just shows what happened. Marcus chose to steal. He chose to violate policy. He chose to lie about it. You just chose not to pretend you didn't notice. I thought about that. About Marcus's smile in the conference room, about professional courtesy, about the way theft sounds like strategy until someone shines a light on it and calls it what it actually is, about Hendricks' tan and his expensive watch, and the way he'd looked at me like I was the problem for refusing to go quietly. So, what do I do now? Wait for them to call. They'll want to settle fast before this becomes a criminal matter. And Jordan? Yeah, enjoy this, savor it, because wins like this are rare. Most people who fight like you did lose everything and get nothing. Most people who document theft get fired anyway, and the system shrugs and says, that's business. You got truth on record. You got vindication. That matters more than you know. I hung up and sat in my apartment, watching afternoon turn to evening, watching lights come on across the city as people came home from jobs they still had, from offices where they'd successfully navigated the politics of staying employed. I felt empty. Not happy or vindicated or triumphant. Just empty, like I'd been carrying something heavy for 6 months and had finally set it down and now didn't know what to do with my arms. The settlement offer came 2 weeks later, delivered by courier in an envelope with Meridian's logo embossed on expensive paper, 6 figures in cash, full benefits reimbursement for the period of unemployment, all legal fees covered, including Daniel's hourly rate that I'd been trying not to calculate. A reference letter so glowing it bordered on fiction, describing me as a valued member of our team whose contributions to our logistics platform were instrumental in advancing our strategic capabilities. And an NDA that would prevent me from ever discussing the case publicly, from telling anyone outside my immediate family about Marcus's theft, or Hendrix's retaliation, or the fact that I'd won. Silence in exchange for money, the standard corporate solution to uncomfortable truths. I read it in Daniel's office, city stretching out beyond his windows like it always had, indifferent to the small dramas of people fighting for principles that didn't appear. On balance sheets. Somewhere down there, Meridian's towers reached for the sky, glass and steel monuments to success built on the backs of people whose names would never appear on anything that mattered. "It's a good offer," Daniel said, watching me read. "More than I expected them to offer this early. They're scared." "I know. You'll never have to work again if you invest it well. Pay off your apartment, put the rest in index funds, live modestly. Freedom, basically. The kind most people never get." "What about Marcus?" "He resigned last week to pursue other opportunities, according to the press release. VP Hendrix announced early retirement to spend more time with family. The Attorney General is still reviewing the case, but they'll probably decline prosecution in exchange for restitution and policy reforms. No criminal charges, no public scandal, just quiet exits and sealed settlements. So, everyone walks away. Marcus with a resignation instead of termination, probably with a severance package that made mine look like pocket change. Hendrix with a pension instead of disgrace, probably with a golden parachute and board seats at companies his golf buddies ran. Me with money instead of vindication, with an NDA instead of the truth on public record. "It's not enough," I said. Daniel studied me across his desk. What would be enough? I didn't have an answer. Justice isn't a number you can calculate, a formula you can solve. It's the space between what happened and what should have happened, and that space is always larger than any settlement can fill. It's the 18 months I'll never get back, the platform I'll never see completed the way I envisioned it, the career trajectory that got derailed because I chose documentation over silence. "Take the deal," Daniel said quietly. "You won. That's rare enough in this world. Don't make it meaningless by holding out for perfect." He was right. He was always right. That's why I'd hired him. I signed the papers that afternoon, watched Daniel witness my signature and seal it with a notary stamp that made it official, watched him send the acceptance to Meridian's lawyers, CCing Patricia Morrison to confirm the case was resolved. 6 months later, I was building again. New company, new project, new team. Healthcare software instead of logistics, a startup instead of corporate machinery, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that was still deciding whether to be trendy or industrial. But the code was still elegant, still mine, still meaningful. The work mattered. Patient data systems that could save lives if we got them right, kill people if we got them wrong. High stakes without the high politics. I never went back to Meridian's building, never drove past it, never looked it up on maps, never checked to see what happened to my logistics platform. Some things you have to let go completely, or they'll follow you forever like ghosts you built yourself. Marcus disappeared from the tech scene entirely. Last I heard through the grapevine, and the grapevine in tech is long and has excellent memory, he was working at a private equity firm his father's friend ran in Connecticut. Some quiet job analyzing acquisitions, something where his Stanford degree mattered more than his judgment. No direct reports, no strategic initiatives, no code he could steal. VP Hendrix retired to Hilton Head. Golf and grandkids and the quiet dignity of men who get to leave before consequences catch up. The settlement money let me buy a house with a real office, floor-to-ceiling windows, view of mountains instead of city lights. Sometimes at night, I still think about those 18 months. The code, the obsession, the belief that building something beautiful was enough. I know better now. Beauty isn't protection. Documentation is. Truth is. The willingness to fight even when you know you'll probably lose. Even when everyone tells you it's easier to walk away. Even when walking away is objectively the smarter choice. But I also think about Patricia Morrison, sitting in that municipal building with her file and her patience and her 3 decades of watching powerful people lie to her face. About Daniel ordering scotch at noon and asking what I really wanted instead of what made sense. About the way justice looks nothing like the movies. No dramatic speeches, no moral clarity, no moment when the music swells and everyone recognizes truth simultaneously. Just hours of bureaucracy and paperwork, and someone finally, quietly saying, "This was wrong. I built something beautiful once. Someone tried to steal it. And for once, just once, the system worked. Not perfectly, not completely, not in a way that restored everything I lost, but enough. Enough to prove that documentation matters, that truth matters, that the timestamps don't lie even when everyone else does. Enough to let me sleep at night. The city lights are on now, spreading across the valley below my window, like a map of other people's ambitions and defeats. I pour myself a drink. Good whiskey, the kind I can afford now without checking my bank balance first, and toast the skyline. To theft that leaves clues, to access logs and timestamps, and Patricia Morrison's patience. To judges who read the fine print, to lawyers who bill by the hour but fight like it matters. To walking away with proof that you were right, even when being right costs everything. The ice cracks in my glass, sound sharp in the silence. And somewhere in this city, someone else is probably building something beautiful, not knowing yet whether they'll get to keep it, not knowing if they should be documenting everything just in case, if they should be reading their employment contract more carefully, if they should be learning the difference between professional courtesy and professional survival. I hope they're taking screenshots. I hope they're backing up their logs. I hope they understand that trust is a luxury you can't afford when your work is good enough to steal. Because everyone lies about who they are after dark. But some of us keep receipts. And sometimes, not always, not even usually, but sometimes, that's enough.